Hi, and welcome to the GT Woodshop, bourbon lovers and aficionados all, one and all. Bourbon. Just saying the word makes you want a little taste, doesn't it? But it's not 5 o'clock yet, and that would be wrong. Slippery slope. Don't go there. Standards. Got to remain functional at all times. So I'm starting from scratch with all but one piece of the material that I'll be using for this build. And that piece is the pre-veneered oak MDF for the back panel. Everything else is coming from rough sawn stock or unveneered ply panels. So for the carcass, I've got oak timber here in front of me that you can see. I need to work out the best cutting plan to get the maximum yield out of each piece, which I'll do. Then I'm going to prepare the timber on my planer, so I'll surface one face, then I'll joint one edge to that, and then I'll thickness them all, not to a uniform size. It doesn't matter if they're different sizes. May well give a little bit of something extra to the panels if they are different widths when I cut them down. But once I've got them to par, planed all round, then we can stop again and have a talk about preparing for the joinery method. So let's get the timber prepared and see you back in a bit. So I've got my piece of oak laid out in place, ready to cut. I'm clamped on the left, and I've got a little piece of offcut over there on top of the MFT, so that as I cut through, that piece will drop away from the blade slightly, and I won't get the blade trapped and it won't snap back on me. Well, that's all my pieces cut to rough size. And now it's time to start planing and making tons of sawdust. So my approach is quite simple. I'll flatten one side on all of them first, working from one pile and creating a second. And I'll place each piece on the infeed table, identify which side of that piece has got the least warping, cupping or crowning in it. Then I'll flatten that side, place it on my outfeed pile if you like. I'll work through all of the timber that way first, and then I'll edge joint all the pieces, and then finally I'll convert the table and I'll thickness all the pieces. I thought I'd stop and show you this a sec. It's a fairly typical scenario I come up against. So the majority of the piece is lovely and flat, but we have this knot and split here and this depression in the timber. So I have to make a choice between continuing to plane it down and lose thickness to gain more width, or I could stop where I'm to, have this piece to go towards my cabinet side panels, and then lose this and use that piece in another project, which is what I'm going to do with this. So I now have all of my pieces planed on one face, and now it's time to joint one edge. So the process, again, is fairly simple. It's not fairly, it is simple. I start by making sure my fence is still square with my bed, which it is, as expected, because it's a beautiful hammer felder machine, and therefore it's perfect. Then I'll take my piece, keep it flat against the fence as I pass it over the cutter head. Now I can't get that guard perfectly up against the timber all the time, so I'll bring it as close as I can without trapping and creating more resistance, and I'll keep my thumb firmly on top of the piece so that my hand doesn't slip, and then I'll push it across. Probably, depending on how bad the edge is, about 1 mil, maybe a 2 mil cut. So all my pieces are now plain, square and true, and I'm ready to start slicing them down to the thickness that I need. However, now's also the appropriate time to stop and think about the template I'm going to be using on the router table when I come to do my half-blind dovetails. Looking through the templates that are available and the router bits that I have, a 5/8 7 degree number D7625, in case anybody's interested, matches with the MDovK template. If you remember, I said I wanted my cabinets 350mm deep. With 340mm lines up beautifully between the lines, exactly between the lines. And what's 10mm between friends? Let's bring you in for a better look. So there's my MDovK template. And if I take my ruler, 340mm, I'm at max, but that will work out rather nicely. Meaning I need to achieve at least 340mm in my glue up. Well, that's my first two pieces cut, and as you can see, I have enough for my first panel. So what I've decided to do is, as the pieces come off the saw, I place them exactly as they were in the piece that I've just sliced, and then I can alternate them to make sure that I've got alternating grain across my panel. Then I can mark each piece so I know when I come to glue up, all those are pre-arranged, they sit together nice. So we'll call this panel 1. I can now set these to one side. And continue slicing. Good morning and welcome to another beautiful day in Zamunda. I've got all of the pieces cut to size for my end panels, side panels, I beg your pardon. I've not yet started on the top and bottom pieces. I thought I'd get the glue ups underway. I have a limited number of clamps, well, reasonably limited. I do have a limited amount of space in which to put the panels whilst the glue is setting, so they can all be setting as I'm cutting the pieces down to size for the top and bottom. So I've got my standoffs here ready, cleaned down, good to go. My clamps are ready. I've got some pieces of scrap to act as coals for the sides just to make sure I get it all straight. Glue, clamps for the coals. Controversially, I'm on the coffee today. Thought I'd give the tea a rest for half an hour anyway. So let's have two, eh? Look, two. The glue up itself is quite straightforward. I want just enough glue to give me a good squeeze out on each joint. And hopefully not so much as it runs all over the place. Keeping good pressure down. Well, I've just taken the last boards out of the clamps and I've knocked off all of the glue snots, so I'm ready for the next step, which is to surface one face and then thickness the other face. I'm not going to use the jointer to trim the edge up because it's too easy to set the edge so that it's not parallel with the joints in the boards by putting too much pressure on the front or the back. So I'm going to set my reference edge using my rail saw on the MFT. This is also the point where I find out whether the 3mm allowance I've left on the thickness of each strip is enough to accommodate any deviation that's occurred in the glue up. A moment of truth. Let's find out. Well, 4 bags of sawdust and half a day later, and I've got some flat boards ready to actually start making my cabinet with. I must say, using the new planer thicknesser is an absolute joy. Opportunity for link. If you haven't seen the video, explain your links, Graham. But I do feel a little fatigued after all of that. Joyous as well, because the job's done. So the next step is, as mentioned earlier, to create a reference edge and then to square off of that reference edge, size the boards, blah, 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 blah. I can't size the boards until I've set depth of cut, so I know how much is going to be left after the router cut that I need to include in the overall length. And that would make this video far too long. Gosh darn. So here's an ideal opportunity to end part 1 and to give you some little teasers about part 2, which of course will be, sounded like a stuck record, creating a reference edge, squaring and sizing the boards, and performing all of the setup tasks on the router table, and quite probably cutting the dovetails as well. I do hope that's enough to encourage you to stick around long enough and watch this series of videos to the end. I tell you what would help, that little old subscribe button down there, give it a click. Okay, thanks for watching and see you next time. Ta-ra.